today. My name is Duncan Odero. I'm the programs coordinator for our food security that's being implemented by CAS in Kenya. Just to give you a brief and a short background of CAS, CAS in full is Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, which is a German political foundation and is closely associated with the CDU party and has been operating in Kenya since 1974. And we have a presence in over 120 countries. Our main mandate in Kenya is to promote democracy, rule of law, and social market economy. What I can say is CAS is implementing a food security governance program in Kenya, or targeting 4 counties in the ASAL areas of Kenya. But we still target in governance, we still target the whole of Kenya because what we contribute still contributes to the entire food security across the country. Just to come to the topic of the day is this year's budgetary allocation sufficient for food security sector? It's a big question. This current year is 2020-2021. And when we talk of budgetary allocation, we are looking at long term and how this one will impact food and nutrition security in the long term. As we are aware, Kenya is looking into agricultural sector as a base from which to grow the economy and boost foreign exchange earnings while attempting to reduce food insecurity. In this way, we shall meet the Big Four agenda by the Jubilee Party, alongside affordable housing, universal health coverage, and manufacturing. Just going ahead, you all know that under Article 43 of our Constitution, the government of Kenya has a civic and constitutional duty to achieve this right to all Kenyans. And by discussing this topic, we are trying to achieve this fundamental right. When I checked out the summary of the budget, we realized that the agricultural sector, which is the main backbone of the food security, has been allocated around 52.8 billion Kenya shillings. While comparatively looking at this has been a decline of around 2% from the last year's allocation. And since 2014, this has been declining, which means food security allocations has been all through less than 5%. This is in deviation from the regional standard where according to regional allocations where food security should be allocated 10%. Further to this, we have realized that 56 of the all stall government projects are related to food security, and we can attribute this to low budgetary allocation. Viewers, our participants and panelists, the meeting for today is bringing us, and we are bringing you panelists who are experienced and have backgrounds in budget allocations. Some of them are our makers, and most of them have worked in civil society and even in the government, and they will delve in this, and we ask for all your contributions, your questions, and every contribution. We are also live on Facebook and Twitter, and you can follow us through those links and apps. Up to this moment, I would wish to invite Charles Olwamba, who will be our moderator, to take the mantle and introduce our panelists. We have 4 panelists today, and Charles Olwamba will be our moderator for the day. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you so much, Dan. I want to take this opportunity to also thank the whole fraternity at CAS, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, for this opportunity to have this live discussion. Food is actually an important cog into our existence in this country, and even peace and development. Now today we are going to discuss one of the most pressing topics even as we face other challenges currently. We know that food security is actually the bane of our nation. We are facing challenges, as you know, the COVID-19. We have had floods in the past. We have also had, of course, currently we are dealing also with the locust challenges. All these have got ramification on food security today and tomorrow for this country. Now, as a nation, we depend on the government financial ability and also financial implication in all that they do to solve some of these problems that we are facing. No, not really problem, but challenges that we are facing. Now, I'm looking forward to a live discussion. I'm looking forward to a participatory discussion from the panelists and to the other people and to the other attendees joining us. I'll request that in any case you want to make an input, just go to the chat and the question you direct may be general to the panelist or to particular panelists you want to respond to some of those questions. And I'm sure time will allow us to respond to all the questions that shall have been raised from the attendees. Otherwise, I want to welcome everybody and I want to give the panelists a round so that they can give us an introduction. They can introduce themselves. At least we hear their voice. I'll start off with the Honorable Dr. Gideon Ochanda. Could you just introduce yourself shortly?
Charles. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Chanda, Honorable Gideon Ochanda. I represent Bondo constituency in the National Assembly. And besides that, I serve in a number of committees in the House. The main one is the Budget and Appropriations Committee of Parliament. I chair SDG caucus, a caucus in Parliament, and also sit as a member of a Regional Integration Select Committee in the House.
Thank you so much, Dr. Second is Madam Judith Libaisi. Madam Judith?
Charles, yeah, I can hear you.
Yes.
My name is Judith Libaisi. I'm an agricultural and rural development specialist with over 15 years of experience. I've worked in Kenya mainly in the farmer organization. I've also worked with an international NGO, and currently I am pursuing climate change. That is my interest for now, and looking at how can we empower smallholder farmers on this particular front so that they can be able to cope with the challenges we have at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I hope you will give us a highlight on how the budget is impacting on the climate change, the challenges we are having from the climate change, and how we are responding to that as a country using the finances. Next is Mr. John Kinuthia.
Thanks, Charles, and thanks for inviting us. My name is John Kinuthia. I'm a senior program officer with the International Budget Partnership. I work in the Kenyan office. At the International Budget Partnership, of course, our middle name sells us out. Our focus is looking at public finance and looking at national and county budgets, with a big focus on looking at how budgets can be formulated and implemented in open and inclusive spaces. But of course, with devolution in Kenya, also looking at the equity and challenges around how distribution of resources is done also at both levels of government.
Sorry, Dr. Mary Orinda.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Orinda. I'm an agribusiness specialist. Currently, I'm lecturing at Jaramogi Oginga Odinga University of Science and Technology.
Dr. we can hardly get what you are saying.
Can you hear me now?
Increase the volume.
Can you get me now?
Maybe you can
Yes.
remove the earphones.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Very well, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Orinda. I'm an agribusiness specialist currently lecturing at Jaramogi Oginga Odinga University of Science and Technology in the School of Agriculture and Food Sciences. I've also worked with the European Committee for Training and Agriculture in Sustainable Rural Development. So I'm very enthusiastic in that area. I'm also interested in food security because we can't talk of sustainable development without food security. Again, I'm also an awardee. I was awarded a scholar by African Economic Research Consortium. I'm also interested in research in matters concerning food security and agriculture. I hope we'll have a very constructive discussion concerning this area. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists for that round of discussion. I think Dan is fully introduced and comfortable, yeah. Now we'll start off the discussion. And I want us to be keen on our budget as the budget of 2020-2021 and its implication on food security. Now, Honorable Dr. Gideon Ochanda, will you just give us just a snapshot of what the budget entails as far as food security this year? Unmute.
One thing that we want to look at when we're talking about the budget is that there are many things, quite a bit of a background to the budget making process in the country, particularly Kenya. One of the main things that has been happening is we have never finished the transitional arrangement in terms of how functions that are devolved are supposed to move from the center to the counties. This is a process that has not been concluded very well, in my view. And if you look at that in relation to issues of food security, you realize that the main agency, the main governments that are supposed to be dealing with issues of food security are county governments. We've isolated agriculture, for example, just as one example. Agriculture is a county function. And when agriculture is a county function, we are still seeing in this year's budget, 56 billion still remaining at the center, that is Nairobi. What does that mean to an agency that is supposed to be actually doing agriculture, which is the county government? That's one thing that we need to recognize. Number two, that we need to recognize that this time around, we are doing a budget against a background of this COVID stuff. And a lot of what would appear as food security arrangements are coming in as part of stimulus packages. And this year's budget, what are treated as stimulus package is almost the same amount of money that's going to agriculture. Agriculture has 56, and stimulus packages also are also 56 billion. So if you look at the two, you realize that a response, the COVID response in terms of stimulating the economy, which includes also agriculture and aspects of food security. This is water, this is infrastructure, this is irrigation. This is, you realize that a lot of what we call economic stimulus package for the current financial year are issues largely to do with food security. So that means that if you only isolated agriculture with 56 billion and say that agriculture had a drop of 5% from last year to the current where it is 56 billion or so, you may not be realizing that part of the money that needed to have gone to agriculture have gone to these issues of economic stimulus packages. Those are two critical things that we need to understand when we are talking about the budget background, particularly the budget background of this financial year particularly. I mentioned number one, that we have never concluded the formal transfer of functions. This is true to an extent that you realize that functions that are supposed to be done by the county governments are still being done at the national level. You also realize that the regional authorities, which are doing exactly the same functions of county governments are also given allocations in the current financial year. The regional authorities, we are talking about Lake Basin Development Authority, the Kerio Valley, we are talking about, and they also have quite a chunk of money that is going to those directions. And these are for sure functions that ought to have been done by county governments. So if you look at that background, and you look at the amount of monies that have been spread out in terms of the current budget, be they in the direction of water, be they in the direction of fisheries, be they in the direction of agriculture, of livestock, talking about, you realize that even in agriculture at the national level, there are smallholder irrigation schemes or water schemes, water storage and stuff like that. So what I'm saying is that there's still quite a bit of amount of functions that the center is still holding that in real sense are drawing back the whole idea of food security in the country. So the counties are not getting adequate resources because some of these things are still held at the national level.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Daktari. And now, at least now we are getting that clearly. It's becoming a challenge that even as we go into budget making process, still there are duplication here and there, and we don't have a clear line. I would wish to get from John Kinuthia from IBP. What are the processes? What are the most important stages of budget making process? And how are we losing out to an extent to what the Honorable Gideon Ochanda is alluding to?
Thanks, Charles. And I think, let me pick up where Dr. Ochanda has stopped. You know, one of the key aspects that we took when we decided to decentralize is the general principle that whatever functions have been given to any level of government, that the funding that is required to implement them then will follow. So when we don't have clarity on those functions, then it also means we don't really have clarity in terms of how we should fund them. And in that confusion, then things can get lost in terms of how we prioritize which level of government should be implementing what priorities, and how do we make sure that even the oversight and accountability after that, in cases where things don't get done as they should, then that process is a bit easy. And I think one of the best examples to give some numbers to what Dr. Ochanda has said is that when you look at the 2018-2019 budget, which is the last full year where we have information on the actual expenditure in the sector, if you look at the agriculture sector, I think about 74% of all the resources that were spent in that sector were actually spent by the national government. And this is for a sector that is primarily devolved. And I think one of the key areas that has remained not very well clarified is the role of parastatals, or these semi-autonomous government agencies that spend about a third of our total national budget. So there's still a huge part of that conversation that needs to happen. And I'm good to hear this from Dr. Ochanda, because Parliament can definitely play a big role in driving that conversation. We're almost, 7 years since we started implementing decentralization. So, we want to make sure that we're able to sort out that problem before the normal becomes what we have currently. I think when we look at the processes of budget and our engagement in them, the reason why we decentralize, and allow me to focus a bit on that, is the fact that we believe that there was a role that citizens can play in defining the priorities that then can solve their problems, in defining what services they need, that we needed to go a bit more into decentralization, because resources will get to a place where the the beneficiaries then also play a key role in decision making about the priorities that the government should implement. And when we look at our budgeting process, it's quite a long process from the point of formulation all the way to where we do our audit. But I want to start by saying that there's no one right time to engage with the budget. I think that's where I need to start. Often in Kenya, a lot of weight is given to when the minister comes to Parliament with a briefcase to read out the budget. But by that time, a lot of the decisions have been made that have a very direct impact. For example, the conversation we are having today around food security. I think one of the key areas, for example, that you think about, so when the budget is being formulated, which happens even before the minister comes to parliament, is a period sometime between the end of August to the end of April. And around that time is when we have what we call sector hearings, for example. And at that point, as a country, we get to decide how much money are we going to give to each sector. That happens sometime between mid-February and the end of February. So any conversation we are having with the minister in parliament in June, the decision about how much in lump sum is going to go to the agricultural sector and other sectors that contribute to food security, the decision was made almost 3 months prior to when the minister comes to parliament. So if we sit out and wait for the minister to come, and that's when we say we need more money in agriculture, we are having the right conversation, but at the wrong time. But also this to say that as much as we have to engage with the formulation process, I think the role that parliament plays, especially in the new constitutional dispensation that we have in Kenya, is very important. Because parliament now has a longer period of time to interrogate the budget. This is from the end of April to the end of June, so it's about 2 months. And parliament now has more powers in terms of amendments, because if you look at the language in our public finance management laws, is that parliament can pass the budget with or without amendments. So this is also an opportunity for us to engage. If we've engaged with the national executive and with the county executives at the county level, and we feel they've not really picked up the priorities that we feel can contribute to food security, then parliament and at the county assemblies at the county level have powers to actually pick up that conversation and set things right. And I think that is one of the things that the current budgeting process has created, which is very useful even for us as, for example, civil society organizations can play. But even after the budget is passed, I think it's one thing on what is passed versus what is actually implemented. In budgeting terminologies, we like calling it the credibility of the budget. The credibility of the budget is basically asking, are we implementing what we actually passed? So we might get the conversation right from the time when the government is formulating the budget. We might get it right when parliament is approving the budget. But the question is, will we be able to implement what we actually passed? And this is one of the, and I'm happy Duncan has picked up on that, because this is one of the areas in our budget at the national and the county level where the biggest problem is right now. If you look, for example, at the county level, we did some analysis a couple of months ago where we looked at county budgets for a period of 4 years. And the expenditure, the absorption rate for the agricultural sector was at around 71%. So it basically means for every 100 shillings that counties have allocated and approved for the agricultural sector, only around 71 shillings is spent. And that's a huge, huge problem. And we can touch a bit on some of the causes of that problem. But it's the same at the national level. The national level, we do somewhere around 70 to 75%. So we have we have a responsibility to play a bigger role in terms of monitoring the implementation of the budget, but at the same time figuring out what are the bottlenecks, because they are quite varied, and I'm happy to contribute to that a bit. But of course, the last step, which is the auditing part of the budget, is also critical, because that's where we get to look at whether we got value for money. We might have spent all the money that was given to us, but the outcome that we expected is nowhere close to what we anticipated when we were approving the budget. So the Auditor General, but at the same time, the kind of social audits that civil society organizations do, play a big role in figuring out, are we setting the right targets? Are we achieving the targets that we've set based on the monies that have been approved for these sectors? I stop there for now. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Quite an elaborate discussion. Let's hear from now, Judith. We are looking at a situation that this confusion are actually structural. Now, which sectors do you think are losing out? The critical sectors that are losing out as far as agriculture is concerned and as far as food security is concerned in this confusion?
Sorry, Charles, you come up again?
I'm saying now in the process of all this confusion as far as budget making process, particularly narrowing to 2020-2021 budget, which critical sectors do you think close out as far as allocations were concerned?
Okay, thank you. In my view, when I look at the budget, this year's financial budget, I think it was meant, it heavily meant to do economic recovery based on the disasters that have befallen the country in the past few months. And so what I saw is that there was no great emphasis on I would call it extension or advisory services to the farmers. I missed out on that one. And also I looked at what the budget would have done better in looking at improving or closing up the gap between the allocation, increasing the allocation to the county levels, because already Mheshimiwa has told us that gap, which I also had seen, that the agriculture sector is devolved, yet the huge expenditure and allocation is at the national level. So getting to the smallholder farmer is quite something. I also saw that there was emphasis on trying to improve the environment, but then I still see it could have been done better by getting the smallholder farmer to participate in this process, in the sense that I saw there was some allocation on green climate financing, but then what I see is that this might not get to the farmer. So for me, it is more of what is it getting to the ordinary mwananchi? That is what I'm trying to put on the table. And so I've talked about advisory services. I've talked about, I also saw the gap in terms of, we are talking about improving infrastructure, and through this, the semi-autonomous government structures and parastatals, but then do we really, they are there, but then do they get the allocation to spend? And I also want to say, I still find it a bit ironical that we keep talking about improving irrigation and the infrastructure, yet it has taken quite some time. Every time it is there, but then the implementation bit is a big gap for me. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith. Actually, you have raised a very critical point as far as food security is concerned, particularly advisory and research. Actually, it has been said that there's little research going on as far as food security and agriculture is concerned in Africa, and yet we know the import that sector, what agriculture means, what research means to this sector of food security. Now to Dr. Mary Orinda. We are seeing situations where Kenya is not actually complying to its international standards. And also even some of the local policies that we have passed, which are the standards that Kenya not comply to as far as food security and allocation to agriculture is concerned. And what are the ramifications of this?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Charles. Before I look at the standards, I want to demystify the idea of sufficient allocation. Are we talking about sufficient allocation or prudent allocation? And we all know that allocation can never be sufficient because of the concept of scarcity of resources. So we should talk of prudent allocation vis-a-vis the competing interests. We know right now the 2021 budget allocation had the problem of contracted revenue because of all that we have said, the drought, the all those that have affected the economy. But now, if we are talking of sufficient allocation, what is sufficient? I found it rather absurd that we are talking about sufficient while we should be talking about prudent allocation. And by prudent allocation, I mean an allocation that gives value for money. What is the cost effectiveness of that allocation in terms of the output? And I'm looking at prudent allocation in terms of unlocking inputs for production, enabling environment for investment, both public and private. So having said that, I want to look at, you've talked of standards. In budgeting, do we have standards or do we have best practices? We all know that in budgeting, we don't have standards. We talk of best practices. And so far, we know that Kenya has really tried in terms of best practices. We are now using the PBP, the program-based budgeting, which looks at the objectives instead of the inputs or the activities that are supposed to be done. So that one gives us, in terms of service delivery and the indicators, we are now able to know what was allocated vis-a-vis what is delivered. Are the citizens or the targeted objectives being achieved? Again, we are, in terms of budgeting, I can say Kenya has really tried in terms of public participation and transparency in line with the PFM Act. Again, looking at the budget indices of 2019, Kenya has scored 50 in terms of transparency and 50 in terms of budget oversight, which is, I think, is a plus. And Mr. Kinuthia I think that is his hearing. He can talk about. So in budgeting, I don't think we talk of standards, but we talk of best practices. So coming to the guidelines that you're talking about, our standards, I will think in the line of guidelines of framework of budgetary allocations. And in line with the Kenya signed a treaty called the Maputo Declaration as one of the treaties or the guidelines that, and it committed to allocate 10% of the public expenditure to agriculture, which will now translate to 6% of annual growth in agriculture. And again, after the Maputo Declaration, Kenya also signed the Malabo Declaration in 2014. That was the year of agriculture. And this one also committed to the same Maputo declarations and also brought in the CADP, that is Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, which now came up with the, introduced the nutritional part and committed to end hunger by 2025. So I think in terms of this guideline, I want to look at this in terms of this year's budgetary policy statement of 2020. And we can see in this and the projected one up to 2023, we can see that in 2019-2020, Kenya, under the Agriculture, Rural and Urban Development, which now serves as the food security sector, Kenya only committed 3% of its ministerial expenditure. And the projected 2020-2021, it was 2.6%. Projected 2021-2022, it's 2.5. And 2022-2023 is 2.5. But looking at other sectors, you find that agriculture is not given any priority. The priority key areas for this budgetary allocation are the education, energy sector and infrastructure, and governance, justice and law. So this one tells us where we are in terms of addressing food security and where the priority is. Agriculture is at 9th position in terms of the sectorial analysis. This one implies that we are far much way behind in terms of our commitment to the treaty and the allocations. So again, looking at the local or within the national frame guidelines or framework, we all know the Vision 2030, which is being implemented through the MTP 1, 2, 3. Right now we are at MTP 3 and the Big Four agenda initiatives. And in line with this implementation and the analysis, I think there is a disconnect between the Big Four initiatives and the Vision 2030, because in terms of implementation, we find that MTP3, which is the framework through Vision 2030 is being implemented, is not given priority in the Big Four agenda. Why am I saying this? In the Vision 2030, we had a secretariat that was mandated to implement Vision 2030. But again, when the Jubilee government came in, they came in with the Big Four agenda. But the Big Four agenda is under this committee that is being chaired by Honorable Matiang'i, that coordinates the implementation of all these initiatives. So you find that the Secretariat of the Vision 2030 is moribund. But again, the Secretariat was supposed to advise the Economic Council that advises the President on the implementation progress of this Vision 2030. So there is some disconnect in the institutional framework or the link between the Vision 2030 and the Big Four agenda initiatives in terms of implementation. So what does this imply for the food security? Taking into consideration of the Malabo and the Maputo declarations vis-a-vis the allocations from our government. In as much as we want to say that we should increase the funding to 10% so as to increase the investment in the agricultural sector, there are other things that we need to look at. Increasing alone will not increase the food security. So I've looked at different aspects of the allocation vis-a-vis the Big Four agenda. And I've also looked at the different programs or the different policies under the Big Four agenda. And the first one, we find that the allocation of the Big Four agenda, most of it are allocated to other initiatives like manufacturing, universal health care, and housing. Food security gets a smaller chunk, or if it gets the smaller chunk, the larger chunk of that goes to the food security enablers, and nothing goes to the core or the drivers of the food security. Again, there are few incentives that goes to the food and nutritional security part. So you find that under the Big Four agenda, food security loses out in terms of the incentives and in terms of the allocation. And this one paints a grim picture for our food security status. Again, as much as we want to talk about strengthening policies and strategies in the agricultural sector, when you look at even at the previous budgets, like the 2018-2019, there were some programs and policies that were to unlock production inputs like digitalization of land registers, insurance of title deeds, subsidy to farm inputs. But the chunk that goes to those programs is not commensurate to what we expect. So as an output that can develop or can increase agricultural productivity, like the subsidy of 3 billion to 200,000 smallholders through e-voucher targeting. In Kenya right now we have...
I can get your concern, Dr. Mary.
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Yes?
Hello?
Mm-hmm. Can I continue?
Get your concern, Dr. Mary. Let's hear what, hello? Let's hear what Dr. Chanda has to say about compliance. Then we'll come back to what you are saying, Dr. Now, Honorable Gideon Ochanda, will you just tell us how Parliament is ensuring that there's compliance on issues to do the budget? When allocations are done, how are the follow-ups made? How are you guys ensuring also that people are participating and all sectors are included in this budget making process so that there are no lamentations like the ones that are being brought up now?
Thanks, Charles. There are a number of things. One or two things I may want to bring out in terms of the process, the budget making process. I think John alluded to a number of things. But one critical thing that we've never thought of is that Treasury is a major, major player in terms of the budget making process. That's the eye and the hub of the executive in terms of how the budget works and how budget is done. Parliament comes in largely for purpose of smoothing it out, for purposes of trying to balance out things. But what has happened, and this is what I wanted us to know or to note, is that the way Treasury works is exactly the opposite of what everybody expects. Treasury is so conservative and so traditional in the way it does things. For the last 13 or so years, if you look at Treasury, they've only had two changes. There's only a change in terms of the CS or a change in the PS. The rest are the same for the last number of years. What does that mean? This means that that bureaucracy that is in Treasury has one linear way of looking at things for a number of years, whether we are in a different environment or whether there are dynamics that have changed in the society. This is one major problem that many maybe don't see. We are talking about these new things. We are talking about international commitments, the international declarations, in terms of what we want to do, the percentages we want to achieve in health, in education, even in security, in terms of ratio between the population and the police. There are too many international things, commitments that we have agreed to. But what actually happens is that when you get to Treasury, they are doing things the old way. New things does not inform how budget works. So this is exactly where we have one major problem, that the Treasury is still very conservative. Am I there? Charles?
Yes.
I'm there?
Yes, you are on point. Yes.
All right. So let me proceed. So one thing that's happening is that Treasury remains conservative regardless of the dynamics that we keep getting into, in terms of all these international obligations, in terms of all the international commitments, in terms of our own national agenda, whether it is Vision 2030, whether they are Big Four, whatever it is. Treasury does things the old way. The Big Four, for example, in the last 4 years or 3 years, you look at the Big Four, try to mirror the Big Four in the budget. Because Treasury presents to Parliament or to the Budget and Appropriation Committee almost a complete budget for scrutiny, meaning that the entity that does the real work is still Treasury. So if you look at what is there in the budget for housing, what is there for purpose of food security, what's there for manufacturing, what's there for whatever, you realize that there are all manner of gaps that exist every single year. Look at the issue of, let's say, manufacturing. The last financial year, we placed money on Rivertex for purpose of manufacturing, as an example. You place money to rehabilitate and to have Rivertex works, but you put 30 million to do cotton. Rivertex has to rely on cotton. Cotton, for purpose of cotton growing areas, if you supported those cotton growing areas, definitely they'll produce more cotton for purpose of Rivertex. But the reverse takes place. You revive Rivertex, but you don't revive cotton. What are you doing? And this kind of problems exists from time to time. This year's budget, talking as a person who sits in the committee, we had to take back to Treasury twice what they had presented to the committee. These issues of economic stimulus in terms of response to COVID and the stuff like that were things that were now brought in by the budget committee. The issue of economic or stimulus packages, the president mentioned it, but the Treasury does not place this in the budget. That has occasioned a third supplementary budget when we are left with 1 year
to complete one week to complete the other financial year, meaning that Treasury works the old way. Treasury does not go with the dynamics that are there in the society. The next thing that I wanted to mention is, which has been alluded to, we are talking about issues of food security. This year, we are taking 362 billion Kenya shillings to county governments. If you look at deeply in what county governments do, it's largely for purpose of food security. It's agriculture, it's water, it's livestock, and what? Livestock, agriculture, and maybe infrastructure. Basically, those are the three things. So the entire 362 billion shillings that are going to counties, we need to see it get into food security. What do counties do? How much amount of that 362 billion is going to go strictly for purposes of food security? Jonah talked about absorption, which is true. There's a problem in terms of how money that are allocated gets absorbed. It is a problem. But back to what you are asking, Charles, like in terms of what are we seeing in terms of accountability and oversight of the budget? The Budget and Appropriations Committee does not oversee the implementation of the budget. That's another problem. The committees that deal with overseeing budget implementation are departmental committees. Budget and appropriation, this is now the dynamics that are in Parliament that are also not useful. Yeah? Budget and appropriation writes the budget. When it comes to overseeing the implementation of that budget, oversight is left to the departmental committees, meaning that once, like now, Budget and Appropriations Committee has placed 56 billion Kenya shillings to the national agriculture, for example, agriculture department or agriculture ministry. The next thing is supposed to be looking at how does this money operate? Where does it go to? Does it go to the things that were supposed to be dealt with? Where does it go to? That at that level, Budget and Appropriation Committee is not at the stage. The stage is now left with agriculture and livestock departmental committee in Parliament. So the way Parliament works in relation to how budget is made, the budget process, there is also a gap. If the Budget and Appropriations Committee was supposed to also follow, we made the budget, how exactly are the ministries, the departments, or what we call the SAGAs, state agencies, to what extent are they implementing this? Because we are aware where we had placed money. We need also to be aware is that the money we placed, did it go to the right thing that we had meant it for? This is a big problem. And it's a challenge in Parliament, that oversighting budget is done by departmental committees. Making budget is done by Budget and Appropriations Committee. And there's nowhere where a departmental committee reports back to the Budget and Appropriations Committee. There's not that kind of a connection is not there. So if the ministry did not utilize the money that was placed for it in a financial year, is not used right, it is the departmental committee that does oversight and will comment and will say something and relate direct to that department. So they don't relate backwards to the budget committee, which in the subsequent year is supposed to place money for the same department. So this is the kind of the divergences.
And Honorable.
Yes.
Maybe if you could comment as well, there's an office. Are you getting me?
Yes.
Hello, Honorable.
I'm getting you,
yes,
Charles.
I'm saying in the Parliament as well, there's a PBOs. Yes, there's a PBO in Parliament. That's a public budget, I think parliamentary budget office.
Yes.
PBO, yeah? So
PBO.
what's the role of PBO vis-a-vis the committee, the budget PBO. Making committee? The committee
PBO is a technical arm of the Budget and Appropriations Committee. So that's its role. It's a technical arm. It checks in what Treasury has, all this kind of requests that before the budget is made. Each department and whatever takes their needs to Treasury. Treasury puts them together, and by the end of the day, Treasury brings this to Parliament. The analytical bit of what is presented to the House is done by BPO. BPO analyzes one word from a figure to a figure and a word to a word for purposes of advising the Budget and Appropriations. Did you get it, Charles?
Thank you so much, Honorable, on that. Yes, thank you so much on the input. Now get it clearly. I'll come back to you on the same.
Okay.
Let's hear first also from John Kinuthia. John Kinuthia, which opportunities do we have in the budget making process that you had explained? Which opportunity do the interest group have, and how can they engage these committees so that we have prudent allocation, as Dr. Mary was saying, for food security?
Thanks, Charles. I think, so let me start where Dr. Orinda stopped, which is the opportunity that comes with the fact that we have a program-based budget. I think one of the biggest advantages to program-based budget is that they don't just talk about what allocations have been made. They also talk about what we're supposed to achieve with the monies that we've actually allocated to different departments. So that means that there is sorry.
Dan, can you mute?
Thanks. I think there is an opportunity for us to look a bit more closely at what is it that we are trying to achieve, so that allocations are not just about it's gone up to 50, it's gone down to 40, it's gone up to 100. It can actually become more closely to, this is money that is supposed to help 300,000 farmers to do X. So even when we are coming back to Parliament and asking how are you tracking what is happening with the budget, we'll not ask them, did you check whether the ministries were able to absorb their money? No. What we'll be asking them is, did 300,000 farmers do X, Y, Z as we had approved at the budget? And I think the program-based budget, with its gaps, we are still not there. We are still tweaking it as we go. I think it's a huge opportunity and is one of the good practices in terms of budget presentation that Kenya has actually taken up and is being done across the world, you know, as a transition into more performance-based approach to budgeting. So I think that's one key opportunity that exists even for Parliament in terms of monitoring what is happening across the sector, and also kind of looking a bit more closely at whether we are achieving the objectives we are setting ourselves on food security, because it means Parliament is able to ask questions that are more leaning in the direction of the outcomes that we expect, to be able to say we are making the right progressive move towards making sure that Kenya is food secure. So I think that's one big opportunity, which, and this is an important point that Dr. Ochanda has made, is a process that is run primarily by the National Treasury together with the line ministries. So the question is, at what point are the decisions made about the outcomes we expect to achieve, so that even before that budget comes to Parliament, we have a role to play, because all of us in this call are people who play a certain role within that process. And this brings me to the second opportunity. And this is something we call sector hearings. So sector hearings is a process that happens sometime between September. There's always a launch at KICC and it's always big. But there's always a process there that is supposed to allow each sector to sit down, think through its priorities, what they want to achieve with those priorities, and what resource requirements exist based on those priorities, so that by the time Treasury is putting together its budget, those contributions that kind of borrow from very rigorous engagement within sectors have happened. Now, that's what the picture is supposed to look like. But what actually happens? What happens is slightly different, because the sector hearings have basically been for a long time, and I absolutely like the fact that Dr. Ochanda made this point. They've for a long time just been a conversation between government talking to government. So it will be technical guys from, you know, the departments and the ministries that make up a sector that are speaking to each other. So they have a way of doing things that they've always done, and that space is not very open to to what I would say non-state partners who play a big role. I think when you think, for example, the program that Conrad is running right now, you know, whatever you are learning in Baringo and the other arid and semi-arid counties is something you would want to bring to such a conversation. But that conversation, number one, happens in Nairobi. Sometimes it's shipped off somewhere to Mombasa, but it's really a government conversation. It's not decentralized. And this is one of the reasons why, if you look at the Open Budget Index that is done by the International Budget Partnership that Dr. Orinda spoke to, our public participation score is 20 out of 100. And part of the reason why we are doing so poorly is because we are having a conversation about agriculture, which is the biggest sector in this country, but it's happening at KICC or in some invite-only kind of spaces. So we need to decentralize that process. We need to listen to the biggest drivers of the food security conversation, who are smallholder farmers. If you look at the census that was done last year, about 6 million households in Kenya, out of a total of about 11, all practice agriculture directly. So how do you bring the voices of those smallholder farmers, who are really the big answer to the question around food security, into these conversations that are being done around the agriculture sector, which then informs the outcomes that we hope to achieve as a country in these program-based budgets that we are talking about. So nothing can be discussed in silos. And so I think that sector hearings conversation at the national level is really important, but not to let the counties get away with it, because even at the county level, they are supposed to be sector hearings. At least at the national level, we have them, though they are not as, are not structured as we would want. But at the county level, there are very many counties that have actually not put in place this kind of sector conversations, which I think is also a gap that we need to see how to keep improving. Then lastly, I think, Charles, in terms of the opportunities that I also see here, is an opportunity for us to do a little bit more when it comes to budget implementation. I think as Kenyans, and probably the way we are as a people, we do love the process of budget formulation, where we are just saying we want this, we want that, we want this, and we want that. But we don't see that same rigor of engagement when it comes to the process of implementation. And this is on two sides. So on one side, we have the citizen side, which we as civil society organization need to take a little bit of blame for it. We mobilize communities that we work with and civil society organizations that we work with and community-based organizations to participate in the priority setting process in the budget. But when it comes to budget implementation, somehow that energy goes down. So we don't have as many people and we don't have as much focus when it comes to budget implementation, and that does create a gap for two big culprits. Number one, there are things we call supplementary budgets, which happen in this period. Now, when you look at the budgets at the county level, you realize that supplementary budgets happen every year across every county. But when you look a little bit more closely at when we make those changes in the supplementary budgets, where does the money go? Because there's a whole prioritization conversation that is happening at that time. So what you notice is that money will move to sectors like roads, money will move to the county executive services, where the governor's office and the rest sit. And agriculture is one of the sectors that has always lost when supplementary budgets happen. So when we take our eye off the implementation process, then some of the things that happen in that space are of that type. So there's a role that we can play as civil society organizations, a very open space, and which I think we need to jump into. And the second part of it is parliament. I think I will be doing a great disservice to Dr. Ochanda if I didn't put parliament on the spot here. One of the things that we've done right now in our public finance management law is to introduce a process where parliament gets budget implementation reports every quarter to be able to see what is happening in the budget process, even before the year comes to an end. And even to make it better, they get two sets of reports. So one of those reports is from the Controller of Budget, which is an independent report, and the second one is directly from Treasury. And so the question is, what does Parliament do with these reports? Because that's also supposed to be an oversight role that, when combined with what we do as non-state actors, is supposed to make sure that that process is a bit more engaged with than we are doing right now. So I think there's a role that Parliament can play in terms of the utilization of those reports. I know there have been lots of questions about whether the information that is provided in those reports is actionable. Is it too brief? Is it as detailed as what we have in the program-based budgets? The answer is no. But Parliament has a better opportunity, if I can call it that, to be able to ask line ministries to provide more information that can help.
Thank you, John. Okay, are you getting me, John? Thank you so much for bringing that the Parliament out. Actually, we'll ask the Honorable Gideon if at all they do read those reports or they just touch them in the. But we are coming to that, Honorable. Let's hear first from Judith Libaisi. Judith, which are the platforms? Like, for example, we have attendees who are farmers, people who are in the civil society. Which platform are you aware of that food security is the main discussion that we can take advantage of even as we start talking of things to come in the following year? Are you aware of this platform? Are you aware of the civil society or groups or interest groups that are already driving advocacy as far as budget allocation to food security is concerned?
Thank you, Charles. I think I would say that the platforms that are already laid out, John really gave some broad ways where some actors can engaging, and I would like to say that them. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention. I would like to say that, yeah, Treasury, of course, I like what Mheshimiwa has talked about in terms of the redundancy and also the KRA, they are highly involved. But also Parliament, the civil society organizations for lobby and advocacy, and also some apex organizations. Produced organizations. So can you hear me? Hi, Charles.
Yes, but there's a lot of packages. Okay.
Madam, you are breaking.
I think it's the network.
Oh, I think you can mute your video, then
yes,
we hear the audio. It will increase your efficiency.
Is this better?
Okay.
I've muted the video.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes, so I was saying, yeah, some of the apex organizations, there is the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, there is the National Farmers Federation, KENAF, it was doing a good job, and there is also, yeah, not forgetting Kinuthia's organization. We have also some business member organizations that have really come up to contribute towards the budget, and it's also a good platform to plug in. Time and again, we have heard about the trade unions also giving their sentiments on the same, manufacturer associations. And so I would like to mention this, and as I don't know, when before I muted the video, I had also said about some county-based farmer associations, and also we also have commodity-specific farmer associations who would really give specific value chain inputs into the budgetary allocation processes. And I'm giving specific emphasis on these county-based kind of platforms because I know they are the shoe wearers, and they're the ones who know where the pinch is. And if they could be given a hearing, oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
There is an aeroplane passing. Okay, good. Sorry, I stay close to the airport. So I was saying that such kind of, some people call them grassroots organization. I would like to call them people, indigenous organizations or associations. They are also quite good, and they can be used as a platform to raise issues, and they can be heard. And I would like to pose a question, not a question, or rather a suggestion, especially to CAS, to suggest that such kind of organizations are there, people are already organized, but then the information of how they can tap into this.
Yes, Judith, we get you. Judith, will you mind to
run in this process is doing something in their own small Yes, Charles.
I'm only interested to know if you are aware of any statement from some of the platform you have talked about. What's their take on the current budget, the 2020-2021 budget? Are you aware of any statement they have made, any reservation they have made so far?
I had mentioned KEPSA, I had also mentioned KMA.
Are they comfortable with the budget as it is?
There is also the, sorry, I've just forgotten the name of the organization, but where the CEO is Kwame.
Oh yeah, Institute of Economic Affairs.
That name. Yes, yeah. So I think those are some of the organizations I've had interactions with in the recent past.
Thank you, Judith. One of the organizations you have mentioned, the Farmer Group Farmer Association. Interestingly enough, Dr. Mary is chairing the Association of Fish Cage Farmers. Will we hear from Mary? What are your members saying about the budgetary allocation? Yes, Dr. Mary?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Charles. Before I talk about my organization and their view on budgetary allocation, I also want to add on what Mr. Kinuthia said. I talked of budgetary index of 2019 budget as we had 50 over 100 and transparency, 20 participation, and 50 oversight. And my opinion is that the quality of input that goes into budgeting process is going down. The participation has been reduced just to a matter of checking boxes. We have done this, we called people, and they are not keen on what kind of people that they call for their input. Again, there is a lack of evidence. Like I can talk of evidence basis of that budgeting process is lacking. Why am I saying this? This is because when you call people, they give their views, there should be feedback. But the general feeling on the ground is that we give our views, but we are not told of the resolutions after that. It is just a formality. We have to be called to give our views. We have to be called because it is spelled out in the PFM Act that budgetary process must be participatory. So in terms of participatory, I think we are losing out in the quality of the input. Now, going to allocation in the fish sector, vis-a-vis what my what my organization or the feeling on the ground is that first and foremost, fish sector is a very important sector in this country. And it is also recognized as one of the sectors that contributes to GDP. Like I think in 2016, 2017, the contribution was 0.8% from the sector. It's also a sector that has the potential for job creation and also poverty alleviation. So developing this sector will go a long way in achieving SDGs 1, 2, 3, 8, 13, and 14. So under the framework of Vision 2030, the government committed to expand the area of fishing and reduce post-harvest losses, increase the marine export. But looking at the analysis of the MTP2, because right now we are in MTP3, the government came up with so many challenges in the fish sector. And you are left wondering, why are they just talking about challenges vis-a-vis achievements? And I looked at the MTP2 report, and the good thing is that the government or the report talked about the decline in fish production by 21.3%. And this is an indication that there's something wrong in this sector. In my opening speech, I said that food security is the mandate of the government. It is a basic right for everyone. And the only way that the government can show commitment to this sector is by committing resources in terms of the budgetary allocation. So we are not seeing this in the sector. And in my analysis, I think this is one of the causes of this decline in the fish production. Again, I'm also delighted to note that they are also noted that cage farming is an emerging modern technology that can help in fish production in this sector. But again, they are not supporting this sector. There is low investment and value addition. There are myriad of challenges like weak stakeholder association, lack of supporting legislative policies and framework. So in my view and my analysis of this year's budget, excuse me, this year's budget vis-a-vis the fish sector, although under the food security, we have been allocated 1.8 billion for the aquaculture business development program, this is not enough compared to other departments within the arid sector. So you find that when you look at the trends of allocation in this sector, and I looked at the trend from 2016-2017 budget, the allocation that goes to this sector is, this department is less than 2%. Like in 2017-2018, there was an allocation of 2.91 billion, and this was 0.1% of the whole budget of the ARUD sector. And the same, you can look at the trend and see in 2018 it was 2.79. It only increased in 2019, which it reached 3 billion. And in 2021, we have the government has given priority to aquaculture business development program, which has been given 1.8 billion. So this implies that the government has never given priority to the fish sector. And the sector, I want to contrast the situation now and back then when we had the economic stimulus package that ended in 2013-2014. When the government came up with the economic stimulus package and the program under FEP that targeted fish production, we saw an increase of fish production from 1% to 20%. And we also saw increase in consumption from 2.4 kgs per capita per year to 4.5. But again, the government is keen to increase this consumption rate to 10 kgs per capita per year, and also to increase production from 1,228,000 metric tons to 300,000 metric tons. But now we are wondering, how will the government achieve this if the allocation that is targeted for this sector is barely 1%? is barely 1% of the ARUD budget. ARUD, I mean agriculture.
Dr. Mary, did your organization make any submission or proposal to the budget committee that we can tally against the allocation?
Okay, thank you, Charles. And 2019-2020 budgetary process, we had one person from our association that participated when the county government was making their budget. But we are surprised that our input never realized any allocation. And in the same applies to 2020-2021 budget. We had 2 people participating in the process of budgeting. So again, I'm looking at the allocation, and I'm left wondering if the government really wants to develop this sector, what are the core priority areas that the government should look at? And in our view, with our organization, we feel that the government is looking at the hardware part of it instead of the software. The software is neglected. And by software, we are talking about policy. It is in this sector that we don't have policy guidelines, for example, for the cage farming. And this is a threat to the investment in this industry, because as an investor, I will not invest in an area whereby we don't have policies, we have no guidelines. So as an organization, we are keen on what the government is doing, and we would like, if it is possible, that the government take up the initiative of ensuring or enforcing that the 2016 policy on cage guideline is enforced. Again, we had the 2012 to 2017 aquaculture policy, which expired in 2017. We yet to have another one. In 2018, they were revising this policy, but due to lack of funds, this policy is 2050, I think is 50% done. So as a sector, we are worried because we can't enforce or we can't advocate for allocation if we don't have a policy framework for this sector. So policy is very important. And in this allocation, I've not seen any allocation that has been allocated for policy. The government has prioritized aquaculture business development project. Again, when we look at the sector, we are more concerned about developing the whole value chain. How do we connect all the segments within the value chain? How do we connect the market with the production side? So we are looking at allocations that will unlock or upgrade the value chain activities for this sector. Again, that one, I've not seen any allocation that has targeted that. And 2018-2019 allocation, we didn't have any allocation, budgetary allocation. There was none that went to fish activities. And
Madam Judith somebody to mute. Madam Judith will actually touch on the value chain. Just hold it so that we come to that with Madam Judith. Now you have raised a very important point, Dr. Mary, on the and also Kinuthia on the response from Parliament. Now, Honorable Dr. Chanda, first, is it true that you guys don't read the reports that come to the Parliament, the report that go out here? Is it true that you are like one of the participants has asked a very interesting question, that is the process, those who are involved in the process, are you even aware of what is going on around in the region, that our farmers are currently moving from maize plantation to other activities, yet the allocation, the budgetary allocation, does not reflect that movement? Is it that you are copy pasting these budgets? What is really happening in this budget making process as far as food security is concerned from the parliamentary perspective, Honorable Ochanda? I've lost Dr.
Yes, Doc. Hello.
Pole, we have lost Daktari. I think the phone has gone off. Okay. Sorry, Daktari is just sorting out his phone, then we are continuing. Now, maybe we can go ahead with what John was bringing about in this budget making process. Now, John, we are facing two challenges of food insecurity currently with the locust invasion and also the COVID-19. And as we move into this, we are going to face even more challenges into this food security. But in terms of participation in this process, when there was a lockdown, which were the innovations your organization and the partners and interest groups were using to ensure that the sector is alive and engaged in the budget making process?
Thanks, Chas. So definitely the measures that were put in place have affected the physical gathering. As you know, public participation in Kenya is equivalent to people meeting in a social hall. In Baringo, where Duncan and the team work, people meet under trees. You know, these gatherings are part of what is part of the process of public participation. But with the fact that now people are not able to meet, we've seen quite some interesting innovations. I think at the beginning we were a bit worried that everything will, you know, come to a halt. But let me use Baringo as an example here, because it's one of the counties where we work. And one of the things that we've noticed is that, number one, community radios became a very central space for engagement. And as much as that process was started by civil society organizations, we quickly saw the county assembly actually come to the radio as well. And they actually did their public participation a couple of weeks ago in a very interesting combination. So they had people in all the 6 sub-counties in Baringo, and then there were physical meetings, of course, of less than 15 people. All those people are connected to the county assembly through a Zoom call, and that Zoom call was being relayed live on Radio Alpha, which is one of the popular community radio stations in Baringo. So I think one of the things we've learned is not to underestimate the creativity, even in areas that might not seem very technologically savvy. And we've seen those virtual spaces in different ways. We saw Kajiado with ward level WhatsApp groups that were even put in the newspapers. We've seen, you know, efforts around, you know, the government trying to engage with the public directly through radio or directly through Zoom, which I think has been a good thing. But as civil society organization, at this point, there's something about us that is getting tested. So we often speak of how we work on the ground. Now, working on the ground is getting tested during this COVID-19 time, because this is when you get to know how well those community champions and community stakeholders that we work with are able to still engage with the process without we as civil society organizations being able to reach them. And I think we've seen quite some good evidence where those community stakeholders have still been able, you know, even using just phone calls to speak to key people within their communities and still write memos that get to the county assemblies. And we've also seen county assemblies make an effort to still reach out to the people who made input, even pulling them into some of those virtual spaces. But also at the national level, we've seen the same, where the National Assembly and the Senate have also taken advantage of you know, the virtual spaces that we have to actually bring civil society organizations in. And I think even when we'll be able to get back to holding physical meetings, one of the things that we've learned, for example, for us as the International Budget Partnership, is we always hold national budget analysis forums every year. But this year, because we've been forced into Zoom, we were able to bring in partners from 24 other counties. So even when we go back to having physical meetings, it's clear that there is an opportunity for us to bring more voices from across the country into a space that has been constrained by distance because we are meeting physically by people who are able to travel from nearby places, which I think is a good thing. So I think one of the key things in terms of the innovation, as you might have called them, Charles, is so much on how we can expand the engagement with the budget by primarily mixing some of these virtual spaces that we thought some people might struggle with, but we've realized actually they are very savvy. And if people in Baringo, in Tiati, in Tangulube, all the way near West Pokot, in Baringo are able to join a call through Zoom, there's going to be very little excuse why we should not expand those spaces even further.
Thank you so much. Through other means, we have gotten Dr. Chanda. So Dr. Chanda will respond, but using my screen.
Sorry, Charles and the team. My line went to the high waves. Now, I think there are a number of things that we're trying to look at. One, and I want to revisit this in a very firm manner, the whole issue of the role of Parliament in the budget process. I think there are a number of things. One, the Constitution 2010.
Hello, Charles. Doc should have your mic close to him, please.
Oh, you are still disappearing. How is it now? Okay, fine. Now, what I was saying is that the Constitution 2010 brought in a new role of Parliament in terms of the budget making process. Other than the Constitution, I think there are very many other things that needed to have been brought around to make this effective. One, Parliament has to be distinguished because there are two houses. The role of the Senate in the budget process and the role of the National Assembly in the budget process. One, the role of the budget or the Senate in the budget process makes this thing a little bit more complicated. Because the Senate, instead of playing the father figure, the father role that the Constitution has given it, is playing the mother role of giving more food. Just give more food to children, give them more food and stuff like that. But the father figure on the other side wants to look at the issues of responsibility. To what extent is this happening? To what extent can we discipline? To what extent? This is a role that is completely missing in terms of the proper framework of where Parliament is in the budget making process. The Senate, for example, in terms of what goes to the counties, I'd mentioned this earlier. We have 362 billion going to counties, and we're talking about food security. What amount of that is getting into food security? Does the father in this arrangement, what is the father doing? Is the father able to make sure that there's some even distribution in terms of what amount of money goes to each sector, and to be sure that that amount of money is actually used? That's one thing that's a miss. The other thing that's a big miss is the laws that guide Parliament, and a lot of these lie in the standing orders and how Parliament works. You see reports, and this is a question that was raised by Charles. There are reports that are brought in by the CRA. There are reports that are brought in by the controller of budget, almost quarterly. But you see, when they bring this budget, they bring these reports, the reports cover virtually across the department and across counties. So at what stage does, for example, the Senate exclude its bit that is for purpose of looking at counties, and what is left for purpose of the National Assembly? And I'd also mentioned this earlier, because there are these technicalities that are in Parliament. The thing that now you disintegrate that report to go to the departmental committees, and what now remains to the budget and appropriations. You realize at that particular time, CRA and controller of budget are constitutional officers that are supposed to be looked after, or are supposed to be oversighted by the planning committee in Parliament, not budget. So when they bring in a report, and that report has them included, that report has agriculture in it, that report has a county in it, that report, it means that you have to disintegrate this report to all manner of departments, to all manner of sagas, and to all manner of constitutional officers. By the end of it, this report finally, even if you comment on it as parliament, it doesn't make sense. There's nowhere, no particular time that now parliament has congregated, has brought in all these comments from all the departmental committees, has brought in all this from the side that is tabled back for purposes of either proper debate or for purpose of resolutions of the House. So the reports are there. They are brought largely quarterly, but Parliament hardly looks at them because the manner of how things are arranged in the House, the standing orders of Parliament. Standing orders of Parliament to an extent has still not brought in this new role of Parliament properly. There are still things that are still very loose. That's one thing that I think I wanted to mention that Charles brought out that needs to be clear. But I wanted to comment on a few other things. One is, I mentioned earlier that the budget making still remains a very routine thing. So routine, and I'd mentioned this, particularly the role of Treasury, it's just like it's an annual routine that we must do. There are all manner of PR processes, and I call them PR. John had talked about the issue of, for example, public hearing or sector hearings. Those, again, are routine. Time comes that we must do a sector hearing. It comes, people discuss, people talk, and it goes. When you get to see how that has impacted on budget making itself, you realize it's zero. You realize that these guys are still in their very traditional way of doing things. Look at, so these things, a lot of them remain more PR, more for purpose of accomplishing what the Constitution wants, that you can't do this before there's a public hearing. You can't do this because before there's a public participation. Look at public participations that are happening in counties. They are horrible. Yeah, they are things that are just done for the sake of it, not for purpose of influencing anything, but for the sake of approving some of the things that have been done by one or two people sitting somewhere. Then they are brought to the wards. There is a public hearing in a ward. People go there. They don't know the meaning of all what they are doing. But by the end of the day, a budget is made. So this is exactly what's going on. And I think those other stakeholders who are doing this outside the government arrangements, the non-governmental agencies, really needs to look at this. What we call public participation here hardly, and I want to repeat that, hardly influence anything in our budget making process. There was the issue of
Hello, honorable member. You can unmute and continue, or Charles can unmute and continue. I can see your microphone is muted.
Is it okay? So I was commenting on the issue, particularly on the aquaculture. The allocations to fisheries, for example, if you look at the allocation of the immediate last financial year, there were allocations that were made. And I want all of us to understand this. Once the allocations are done, particularly after the final weeks of April, what Treasury tables as the annual estimate, please, that's not the budget. We have a huge 2-3 volumes of stuff, yeah, that are tabled in Parliament. They are normally looked at as the estimates, and it's after these estimates are presented is when a very serious work starts with the whole issue of the estimates. It is when the departmental committee starts sitting with the departments. This is the time after the departmental committee sit with the departments that Treasury comes up with a complete new thing that are presented to the Budget and Appropriations Committee. And after that is done, is when a lot of movements are done in terms of allocations, in terms of stuff like those. Finally, what gets out of Parliament, which many of us also don't even see, including myself, I've not seen the one that we finished 2 weeks ago, is a signed copy, what's called a certificate from Parliament, that is taken to Treasury as the final budget of the government. It is the very last. It is the one that is done on the very final week, and a certificate is issued, signed by the clerk of the National Assembly. That copy is never with anybody. That copy goes back to Treasury. Members of Parliament don't know it, and many times I also believe that the departments also don't know it, apart from the few people at the top that know it. And that's normally the budget. What we have, those big volumes of estimates from Treasury, are not the budgets. The budgets is the final signed, certificated copy from Parliament done on the very final week of June. After that, the budget is ready. In fact, it's done the first week of June, then the second week of June, the budget Parliament, the CS reads the budget. So these are some of the dynamics and the technicalities around budget making in this country. So what I'm trying to say is that by the end of it, you'll talk about an allocation, which is in the book of estimates. This allocation, by the time the certificate is issued, is completely different. Then, if it remains, then there's a series of the supplementary estimates that follow. The soups that follow also changes the budget almost entirely. Back to fisheries. Last year, there were good amounts of money that were placed for purposes of even developing some of the beach, landing beaches in Victoria, for example. By the end of the day, I think put together there were more than 300 million. By the end of the day, what I saw as the money that was finally allocated was below 60 million. And I was seeing this at the end of a financial year. This year, what has happened, and I think I want to relate this to food security issue, is where do we place money? Do we place money to either improve on what exists, or do we put money for purpose of diversifying economies of certain areas? Because you get two different results. And I want to bring that to fisheries. Aquaculture development, in terms of where money has been going for the last 3 years, has not been the traditional fishing areas. And when I talk about traditional fishing areas, are fishing areas around Naivasha, around Turkana, and around Victoria, and a bit of it in the coast. So when you talk about aquaculture development, the money has been going to Sagana and Meru and Nyeri. Those are the three recipient areas that have been getting money for the last 4 years in terms of aquaculture development. And they look at it in terms of diversifying the economies of those areas, meaning that there's an economy surviving already. There's coffee, there is tea, there's other things that are happening in those areas. But the traditional fishing areas does not receive anything and does not have any other economy. So when you are diversifying one area, what are you doing to the traditional fishing areas? This year, I can tell you that I was insisting, and I want to believe, because I've told you I've not seen the certificated copy of what came from Parliament as the budget of this financial year. I'm very certain that only 30 million, not 60 million has gone for purposes of aquaculture development in the traditional fishing areas. And that was largely the Lake Victoria. For the last 4 years, there's been nothing in terms of aquaculture development. We gave 2 billion last year, nothing went to the traditional fishing area. This year, we were trying to insist. And in terms of insisting, you were told that no, Sagana had reached this level, you can't abandon it. Meru had reached this level, you can't abandon it. Kiganjo had reached this level, you can't abandon it. So what are you left with? You are left with meager resources for the traditional fishing areas in my view, if I were to do that, those are the areas I would want to target for purposes of aquaculture development, because they have a fish culture. You are taking these investments to areas that don't have a fish culture.
Thank you so much, Daktari, for that. I know our time is fast spent, and we need to bring this to a close. And I would want to hear from Judith and Mary on the impact of, Judith, you will bring us up on the impact of the locust inversion that we have had, and then Mary will do the COVID-19 impact. And let's take a few minutes on this so that we bring this to a close. Judith.
Yes, Charles.
Yes.
Thank you, Charles. I would like to say that the locust invasion that affected us from last year and some good part of this year had a great implication on agriculture and food security. And in this sense that it is even recognized by the current budget that it is going to contribute to a slowdown of the growth of the GDP of around up to around 3.5%. That is in conjunction with COVID and also the flooding. And this also, as all of us knew, it was a great threat to agricultural production. And you could tell that we were almost getting into despair when we were having new swarms coming in from different directions almost on a daily basis. I remember when it was coming from Meru and coming to Embu, it was almost everybody was freaking, and that was a big concern. And then it also raises a question of how are we prepared as a country towards addressing such issues when they arise. But then I would like to say that since the swarms were moving towards now the food baskets of Kenya, and they were kind of curtailed by or rather stopped by the change of environment for them. You know, they are desert locusts, and so when they got to almost the Rift Valley, they experience the coldness and the rains, and so that's why we have not heard about them so much. That's why we have had the number of counties reducing from 20 then to 3 now. But I don't want to say that we are in a good place, because I know that like in places like Lodwar, it is still a menace. And so, and also the areas where they left, there's, according to the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, is that there's a likelihood that there would be a new breed, or rather a second wave of the same. So this does not mean that we lapse as a country. It means that we continue with the control, so that we don't really get to the reduction of the GDP at 3.5%. What I can also say, the risk that I see in this is that when we address this issue as a country, we brought in a lot of development partners and projects to do this. It is not something that we had already planned for it. So it shows that just in case we have this as a second emergence, then we are also going to be still in panic mode like the way we were in the first place. But I also acknowledge that there is already a full-fledged project in this. The only question we have is the resources allocated being fully utilized to control the locust, or we are in a situation where the project activities receive the list of the budget allocation, yet the other activities, doing meetings and all, are getting the better allocation of the budget. So that's what I would like to say. And I would like to also say that I've raised the two concerns, which I think we need to look into as a country, and also see that we are not getting into a panic mode, because the climate is likely to change again. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith. Dr. Mary, if you could take us through the impact of COVID, just shortly.
Okay, thank you, Charles. COVID, in terms of food sector or food security, came at a time when our food system was already constrained in terms of the locust invasion and the drought. And this wasn't the situation in the country. So when we look at the impact of COVID on the food sector and the nutrition, we found that there were labor disruptions. So because of the lockdowns and the curfews, again, when you look at the upstream part of the food value chain, you find that due to the COVID restrictions and the health guidelines, most of the actors within the upstream value chain were not able to carry out their work, or the producers were not able to produce, and those who produced were not able to sell. So some were forced to sell at a lower price, and that is a loss on the part of the producer, reducing the income base and the purchasing power. Again, looking at the downstream part of the value chain, you find that most of the consumers couldn't get the food, like the urban poor, because there was disruption in terms of food supply chain. So that means that the few that could get the food will buy at a higher price because of that disruption. And that also had impact on their purchasing power, because now they had to use more money, unlike before the disruption. Excuse me. Again, there were also disruptions in terms of revenue collection, because the lockdown, there was no production, or there was no productivity in terms of along the value chain. So that means that the government couldn't collect enough revenue. So it means that with the decline in revenue, it means that also will have a negative impact on the terms of budgetary allocation towards other sectors. Again, there was also impact in terms of nutrition. You find that when you can't get the right food at the right time, it means that you'll have to go hungry. So that means that most of the people who couldn't get enough food suffered in terms of nutrition and in terms of hunger. Again, when we look at the postnatal or the maternity or health, and we find that due to the disruption, most people couldn't access this or these services. So that impacted on health. And we know that a healthy nation is a productive nation. So that also have impact in terms of agricultural protection. So the government again also responded of this what I can call 3 R's in terms of the first one, response in terms of cash transfers, that, and also in terms of food, the social protection part of it. But again, I found that they said a lot of, there are no modalities. You'll excuse me, I have a so I keep on.
It's okay, Dr. Rina. Okay, you can get some relief as we move to the next person.
No, I can have what is remaining is not much. So the government responded through social protection and by giving food handouts and cash transfers, but this was short term. So in terms of the response, the government needs to plan.
Actually, your connection is now poor.
Hello, can you hear me?
Your connection is poor.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can I continue?
Hello, Charles. Hello, Mary. You can continue and finalize. We can hear you.
Okay. So the implication of this in terms of food security is that the government needs to plan in terms of both medium and long term. And in the medium term, I'm thinking of restructuring, which should be done through budgetary allocation, so that the sectors like the agricultural sector that suffered this can recover. But in terms of long term, I'm thinking of rebuilding. How can the government come up with sustainable programs or strategies to rebuild a sector or a food sector that is resilient going on forward, because COVID-19 is here with us. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Daktari. Now, because of time, allow me to give you the last 1 minute each to make your closing remark, particularly giving the scenarios that we are likely to see as we move forward in the year, given that allocation that a majority of you have said that were not prudential enough. Now, I'll start with the Kinuthia. Yes, a closing remark. Yes.
As they make the last remarks, please, I've forwarded the questions from the attendees.
Yeah.
Please, if they can get chance to answer the questions I've sent to relevant panelists, then they can do it within the 1 minute chance, please.
Okay. Kinuthia?
Thanks, Charles. So 2 quick ones. Number one, we don't have money for the big four. I want to go straight to that point. So the anticipation that we'll start new flashy things to be able to move our food security conversation needs to be tampered down a little bit. If you look at the last 3 years, in 2018-19, we allocated 460 billion shillings for the big four. 2019-2020, we allocated 451 billion. And we know very well, even in those years, we were not able to push that much money into the big four. This year, the budget that was presented by the minister, only 128 billion shillings has been actually allocated to the big four. So that means because of the environment that we are in, and Dr. Mary has touched on this, we actually don't have a lot of money to do a lot of new things. So one of the things that we have to keep in mind is how do we then make what we are doing now, what is already resourced, to actually pay off in terms of the targets that we've set for those areas. I think that's one of the first things which I wanted to go to straight for, is that the big four is going to be more difficult now because about 63% of all the money that we are planning to collect will go only to debt repayment and payment of pensions. So when you bring in the salaries of teachers and the army and the police, really nothing much will be left unless we are planning to go big on borrowing, which again is the other side that we are planning not to go to. And the second point is, then that means what we are left with is to make sure implementation is done well. So I'll keep emphasizing that that's where really our energies need to go to, is the little money that we have to squeeze every single good thing we can squeeze out of it. And I think for food security, that is going to be very key. Looking closely at the policies around, for example, the voucher system that Dr. Orinda spoke to, how well will it work? Looking at some of the aquaculture aspects that Honorable Chanda spoke to, how well do we squeeze the most benefit out of that? I think that for me is how we can see things looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Judith, your closing remark?
Yeah, thank you. I would like to say that this current budget is being implemented in an interesting season, and in this season we also see that the budget is heavily bloated, but in the bloat it is highly dependent on funding from donors. This is a very risky situation, and being in such a situation, we already know that also as Kenyans, the common mwananchi is tired of the borrowing. So the government needs to start thinking or working smarter around that. So what this brings about is that the lobby groups that I had alluded to earlier need to be on the lookout and watch out for implementation, so that we don't find ourselves going down the drain as a country. Because as you already know that we have projected a decline in the growth of our GDP. And if we are not on the lookout and use what we have well, then we are going not to be very stable. Thank you. Yes.
Hello, Charles.
Hello, Charles. Back to you.
Hello, Charles.
Hello. I think it's a bit lost with the network. I can, Dr. Rinda, Mary,
Yes,
I get back
I'm
to you.
around. My power has just gone off. Hello.
Yes,
My
Dr. I can hear you.
Oh, my power has just gone off, but I'm still following. I'm here. My 1 minute remark or the way forward is I'm looking at the food security scenario now in Kenya, and I'm asking myself if I were in this position to recast the priorities or the pillars of food security, what will I do? Or what will each and every of the panelists do? And my view is that I look at food security in terms of livelihood. So how will we ensure that we unlock the inputs that are used in production so that people are empowered to produce? And in that, one major thing here is property right ownership. How will we ensure that these people have the ability to produce and at a cheaper price, which is affordable, looking at the four facets of food security, that is availability, affordability, accessibility, and utilization. Again, I look at the value chain upgrading and strengthening so that the whole food sector value chain works for all the segments. And the third one, I look at the support system in terms of institutional policies and digital platform. And I think if the government looks at food security in terms of those three areas, then we are good to go now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mir. I think Charles is a bit lost in the network, and I'd wish to pick over for him. Or it is true that food security is one of the four big four for the Jubilee government, alongside manufacturing, affordable housing, and universal healthcare. And the fruitful deliberation that we've had this evening is quite inspiring for our attendees and Kenya at large. Based on our deliberation, we've heard from the honorable member, Honorable Chanda, who's representing the Bondo constituency, and our able partners and CSOs in this sector. And we wish to thank you very much for this. Now that the moderator is a bit lost in the network, I would wish to take it over and really appreciate our panelists, Dr. Mary Orinda, the lecturer for Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. Thank you very much for your participation. Judith Baisi from SNV, thank you very much. John Kinuthia from International Budget, thank you very much. And I think Honorable Ochanda and Charles Olombo are using the same link, and I think because of the network error, but we thank them for during their absentia. Up to this juncture, I think they are back, but I don't know, Charles, can I give you the last time to say the last thank you for the attendees and the panelists? Hello, Charles. Hello. Hello, Charles. Okay, maybe I still can't get him, but I'm able to see him, or they're able to say the last thank you. Up to our viewers, there were around a few questions that I think were indirectly answered. The one about our MCS, I think there are very many CSOs working across Kenya, trying to capacity build our MCAs on legislative issues. It is true some of them may not be in tandem with the legislative process, but because of the capacity build that has been happening, they are able to legislate on behalf of their voters. Another thing is that another question that I didn't hear directly being answered is about the supplementary budget. Charles Olomba, I think he is not able to come in, but Mr. John Kinothia, can I throw this back to you? Do we really get, is there public participation during supplementary budget? John?
Well, not any that we know of. And I think the question that Maurice asked is an important one because it means it has to happen at both arms of government in this case. So by that, I mean at the assembly level, because the supplementaries have to still be approved by the National Assembly and the county assemblies, but also during the point when they are being formulated before they are tabled in the assembly. So I think we have to see, we have to push that both of those spaces get opened so that the people in Siaya have an opportunity to interact with their supplementary budget before it's finally approved and the changes are made. So that's definitely one very big gap in terms of participation where priorities are actually getting revised.
It's okay. Thank you very much, John. A quick one to Judith. Judith, do you think the budget for agricultural sector food securities is leverage on the donor funding? Judith, I think you can hear me. Or do you think the Kenyan government has left this to the donor funding community? Or just a short answer on that? There was a question around that.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I think that is the situation. A lot of we rely heavily on donor projects and donor funding to support agriculture and the related sectors. Yeah, and that is very risky. That's what I had alluded to earlier.
Okay, thank you very much, Judith. I'll mute you then. Oh, Charles, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I know you are with the Honorable Chanda for Bondo constituency. Or can you say the last, can you allow the honorable member to say the last comment before you? Yes, Honorable.
Sorry for all that has happened. I think my very last statements are, one is that if anything good happened to this country in terms of the budget process, was let Parliament write the budget. I think this is one of the best things that has ever happened in terms of our budget history. But apart from this, there's much more that needs to happen around making it practical. I think there are too many loose ends that needs to be tied for this thing to be a proper reality. Otherwise, the way it is now, there's quite a lot of PR, there's quite a lot of routine ways of how things are done until we may not realize much. Including just a good example when you're talking about the national policy in terms of the four agenda. For example, last year, housing, only 200 units were done in a whole year. And yet that was a national agenda by a national government. I think some of these things need to be looked at afresh. The very last one is that the process needs to be simplified to the public. I think there are too many PR engagements that hardly influence the budget per se, whether it is at the county government or it is at the national government. I think the process needs to be simplified, and what needs to be achieved in terms of particularly the public participation bit as a very critical component in budget making needs to be much more clear. What the public participation needs to achieve, and if it doesn't, what effects does it have on the budget making? I think that's what I have said.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Chanda. Charles, I'll give you the last 1 minute just to finalize, then we close this.
Thank you so much. I want to appreciate the panelists for the discussion. It was a good discussion. And you can see that as much as we are blaming, as much as we talk about food security, there are a lot of structural impediments that is actually informing our food insecurity. Moving from this point, I would wish to still engage the panelists if they are interested, if we could come up with a position paper on this, because the discussion has touched on very important areas that we need to talk about, and we need to take it further and not leave it here. So if the panelists are still concerned, we can do a meeting, a virtual meeting, to come up with a Zoom that we can share with Conrad. And also the fact that the Mheshimiwa representatives in the parliament are also in the budget committee. We can take up this with the parliament and also with the other non-state actors who are interested, because we are now coming to, in fact, one of the things that Mheshimiwa has talked about, the certified budget, the budget that comes from parliament and signed by the CS and the officials. It is a challenge that John will agree with me that even in the counties, as we do the advocacies, sometimes we are faced with a situation where we are handling maybe 3 different versions of budget of the same county. We are talking of Siaya County, you are talking of Nakuru County, but 3 different budgets. So you don't know which one to hold the county accountable on this. And it seems that, like the Mheshimiwa had said, it came from the father, and now the children are behaving the very way they've actually eaten this, this fruit. So I'll request the panelists that we get time beyond this to come up with a position paper on these glaring shortages that we are having, glaring gaps that we are having in the budget making process. Otherwise, I want to thank you so much, and I want to encourage you in all the activities that we are doing, so that in this country, in this century, we should not be talking about food insecurity anymore. Otherwise, thank you so much, and thank you to Conrad.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles, and all the 4 panelists. And we know food security is a very important sector. It's one of the 4 Jubilee agenda, the ruling party in Kenya. And your fruitful deliberations. And I wish to thank our attendees for the questions and the contributions and the comments they had on this. It is true, food security is a major factor in this. As we've heard from the horse's mouth, our member of parliament, who's the member of budget and appropriations committee member, from our able partners who have been analyzing the budget for 2020-2021, which is a long term. A long term is 1 year and all over. That will affect food security and nutrition security in Kenya. So, the way Charles has posted, if we can have a position paper on the same, we as a CAS, we are open to this, and we shall be reaching out to this. Or we can still have further discussions on our links, that is Twitter and Facebook. Those are continuous discussions on those apps, and we can continue engaging on the same. Thank you very much for your time. It is very, very important that you participated in this, and we look forward in engaging in other forums for CAS activities. Thank you very much, and bye. Have a good evening, Charles, and say hi to Mheshimiwa. Judith, thank you very much. Dr. Inda, thank you very much, and John Kinuthia, and all our attendees, wherever you are across the country. Thank you very much, and thanks for being friends of Conrad. Bye all.